Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Cordella Forey, Manchester's Director of Public Health. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Podcast, where we're having real honest conversations about tobacco in Manchester, what people use, how it affects their health, and how people can get support to quit from Be Smokefree Manchester. Today, I'm joined by Charlotte Brien. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, Cadell.
Could you tell us a bit about what you do, what your role is, and what you do from day to day?
I am the nurse manager for Be Smokefree Manchester. Be Smokefree Manchester is a community stop smoking service, which means that we work in Manchester City Centre, delivering tobacco addiction support for anyone 12 years old or above that has a Manchester address or a Manchester GP.
So one of the common themes we've addressed throughout the podcast is that a lot of people know about smoking and smoking cigarettes, but actually there are other forms of tobacco use, aren't there? Can you tell us what else is there and kind of things that people do and don't know?
There's a big range of tobacco that's kind of not as commonplace and can sometimes be a little bit more associated with different communities that use it. Things like chewing tobacco, paan as well, things like jerdar, snus, which is a tobacco that's in a little pouch that sits inside your gum. They're not as commonplace and they usually are used in quite specific communities, particularly South Asian communities, for things like paan. People that do use tobacco, but they don't traditionally use the cigarettes that you'd smoke, they might not recognise themselves as a smoker. So really good to be doing something to talk about the niche forms of tobacco as well. One of my friends is from Bangladesh, and we were talking once just while we were socialising about tobacco and smoking, etc. She mentioned that she does use tobacco, and I said, I've never seen you smoke. And she said, no, my auntie, when we went to a wedding together, gave me paan. And I had to ask the question of, well, what's paan? Because I'd literally never heard of it before. And particularly if it's so easy for someone who works in the industry helping people to quit smoking, the fact that I didn't know is surprising, but also really eye-opening to the fact that not a lot of people will come into contact with it. When you smoke traditional cigarettes or rolling tobacco, it's right there on the packet. This contains tobacco. It's highly addictive, and it'll list some various harms with some gross photos to go alongside it. But with niche tobacco products, or smokeless tobacco products as they're sometimes called, that's not the case, and there's even a lot of confusion. Paan, obviously, contains things like lye and spices as well. It can sometimes have coconut and sugar, and it can be used as a bit of a digestive after you've finished your dinner, for example. But it can contain tobacco, and often does. And I think sometimes there's not that much awareness, even from the people that are culturally aware of these specific types of tobacco, but also that are using them frequently.
Yeah, and I was just reflecting that, I used to be a GP, and when you're taking a history and you're finding out about somebody's condition, it's in your training from kind of your first day that you ask about smoking. Do you smoke? Have you ever smoked? If so, how many cigarettes a day do you smoke? So based on what you've learned and your experience in your role, what should people actually be asking? What questions should they ask?
It can be quite difficult with people to have like a really long-winded conversation about all the different types of tobacco there are and those that harms. But we can really boil it down to something as simple as, do you use any products with tobacco in them? Or do you use any tobacco? And just having that awareness that there are different types of tobacco use. Someone might be using tobacco quite regularly but not consider themselves a smoker. I was getting a taxi home from work one day and, got in the back of the taxi, ended up having a conversation with the taxi driver, which I do every time. Had a conversation, he saw my badge that I wear and asked me what I do. I talked about, I work for the smoking service, help people quit smoking, and he quite happily shared that he'd quit smoking around a year prior to that. Congratulated him, was like, oh, that's amazing, it's so difficult to do. He said, yeah, I don't think I could have done it without shisha to help me through for the cravings. And I kind of had a moment to myself, like, did I hear that right? So I asked the question, because I felt like I had to, of when you say that you're using shisha, do you use shisha now? And he said, yes, only at the weekends, do it for a couple of hours with friends as kind of a social thing. We go out for a coffee and when we go to a shisha bar to do that. And I had to kind of break the news to him that obviously shisha does contain tobacco and unfortunately because of the way that the pipe works as well, it's not only as harmful as smoking, it's actually significantly more harmful than smoking. And even though he doesn't see himself as a smoker, and certainly not a habitual one, if he's using a shisha pipe for 2 hours at the weekend, it's the equivalent of having 200 cigarettes.
Wow.
So,
2 hours at the weekend
yes.
is 200 cigarettes. And how did he take that? Was he shocked, surprised?
He was really shocked. He was quite surprised. I think because shisha tends to be mixed with sugars and flavourings, and he said, I always go for like orange and menthol flavours because he really enjoys it. He almost saw it more as a treat or a dessert rather than what it is, which is tobacco use. Thankfully, I was there to put him on the right track and give him the advice.
Yeah.
So he joined the service, and I'm happy to report he was smoke-free afterwards.
Good news story.
Once he got a little bit of support and some products from us to help out.
How common is that misunderstanding, do you think?
I think it's quite common. I do think it's quite common. And I suppose with shisha, it's so interconnected sometimes with being social and spending time with friends or spending time with family. And paan as well is something really similar. So it's so ingrained into those times spent with friends and family that it's more difficult to separate it and see it as tobacco use, the way that sneaking off for a cigarette break does feel like it is actual tobacco use.
And have you found that means it's harder for you to support people to stop within that context?
Particularly women that are using things like paan and chewing tobacco, shisha.
Yeah.
Not only is there the social element of it, which does make it really difficult to kind of break that habit when you're not just removing people's tobacco use, you're removing that time with their friends and family, and that can be really difficult for people to swallow, really. Things like paan, you just put them in your mouth, chew on them for a bit and then spit them out or swallow them. So there's almost no evidence. The things that we would normally associate with smoking that are usually our hook for getting people to decide to quit would be things like, think about the smell on your clothes, think about secondhand smoke, think about, the impacts of those things. And when you don't have that hook to people, that can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to help them to quit. However, we are a service that prides ourselves on being really individualised. Yeah. And for someone that is really conscious of how they're perceived by other people, one thing that we can say is, well, if you are using paan, you're more likely to get things like mouth ulcers, more likely to have bad oral health, because it's sat on those gums, and not to mention, obviously, the increased risk of things like mouth and esophageal cancer. So if you are conscious of how you are perceived to the outside world, so much so that you're choosing your tobacco in a different way, then isn't it a good reason to stop using tobacco altogether? Is that we can stop any negative perception of like having bad teeth, having bad gums, the smell of bad breath, all of those things that we try to make individualised to that person. Yeah. So while absolutely health is a fantastic reason to quit, and that's exactly why we're all here, to try and make people healthier, we have to be conscious of what impact it has on that individual. It's much more obvious to us when something impacts straight away, and I think that's the problem with tobacco use and cigarette use as well. It's a silent killer. You might have that first cigarette or that first bit of paan when you're quite young, and you won't feel any different the day after. You won't feel any different the month after. You might not even feel different years after. However, it will catch up to you eventually. And it might only be 10 years down the line you realise, I can't quite run up the stairs the same way that I used to. Yeah. When that creeping suspicion starts to come in. Yeah. But by then, it's got its hooks in and usually addicted to nicotine at that point, and then by then that cycle is much harder to break.
if someone comes to your service and they want to stop, what are the kind of things that you can do to help people stop using tobacco?
We'll ask about people's health, about their smoking habits, whether they use any different forms of tobacco, and we'll have some conversations about that and try and give as much information and evidence that we can to make them understand the harms of it. Then we'll start talking about the fun stuff. What can we offer to help out? So we do a really large range of products, which can include things like nicotine replacement therapy, which is any product that contains nicotine but not from tobacco. So things like patches, chewing gum, lozenges, mouth sprays all sit under that category. We offer vaping devices for people that want to use them to quit, which can be quite good for habitual smokers that really feel like they need something in their hands to get themselves quit. And then finally, we've also got stop smoking medication, sometimes known as Champix from people that have seen it in the past, but it's varenicline, which is just the generic version of Champix. And that's just a tablet that you take twice a day, and it blocks the nicotine receptors in your brain so that you hopefully do not want cigarettes anymore.
So, and all of those things are available and will work for people who are using any form of tobacco in the way that they would work for someone smoking cigarettes?
Absolutely. It works for absolutely anyone. At the end of the day, it is the nicotine addiction that keeps you coming back for the tobacco product, no matter what tobacco product that you use. So our products will help to make that easier and make the break apart from the tobacco use.
Good. And are you seeing any newer products on the market? Are there things that you're starting to see that perhaps people wouldn't have heard about?
There are a few. So one of the ones that springs to mind kind of first is the use of snus.
Right.
Now, snus can be quite a difficult thing to break down because there are actually two different forms of snus. So one is the most commonplace, which is actually a nicotine pouch.
Right.
And it does not contain tobacco. And it started to get very popular, particularly with footballers and athletes, which means naturally it has the consequence of younger people becoming much more interested in things like this. As that's become more popular, we've seen a little bit of a resurgence in people coming into service that are using traditional snus. So it has the same name, but it does contain tobacco, and those are the little tobacco pouches. So it's used the same way as the nicotine pouches, and you put it at the side of your gums. And you take in the tobacco that way. But obviously it still carries all of the significant harms that any tobacco use does.
What do you think makes it appealing?
It's an interesting one, but I mean, there is some evidence out there that younger people tend to be more likely to use niche tobacco products or particularly smokeless tobacco. And I think it's because there is a stigma attached with smoking cigarettes and smelling of smoke and getting smokers' lines. You know, there is a little bit of a stigma around that. So maybe they feel they can still use tobacco but almost get away with it, which I don't like using that phrase because no one's getting away with anything, and they're certainly not getting away with the health harms associated.
So I guess on that point, I think it's a really good time to kind of remind people what those health harms are.
There is not a single part of your body that is not affected when you use tobacco. It can be something as big and scary as lung cancer, stomach cancer, with things like paan and chewing tobacco, more risk of esophageal or mouth cancer, tongue cancer as well. Shisha is smoked through a pipe, so the water actually cools down the smoke, which means it penetrates deeper into your lungs than a normal cigarette, for example, would, which means more risk of cancer, specifically of the lower lung, which can sometimes be more deadly. Besides cancer, there's also things like heart disease. The carbon monoxide in tobacco increases your risk of stroke and issues with healing. And there's even the smaller harms of medication doesn't work as well if you're taking in tobacco. It doesn't just have a knock-on effect on all of your organ systems, it has a knock-on effect of the things that you're already doing to protect your health and making them less effective.
Right, I mean, that's a really important message for people, isn't it? That even if you're taking treatment for a condition like diabetes or you've got high blood pressure, the medication won't be as effective if you smoke, never mind the fact that the tobacco use will also be having its own effects and could cause all of those different forms of cancers and things and illnesses. Why do you think some people don't see themselves as smokers, like your example of that taxi driver?
I think people don't see themselves as smokers either because they're using a form of tobacco that maybe doesn't produce smoke. So things like heated tobacco, things like shisha, chewing tobacco, paan, for example. So they might not identify with that smoker label. As well as that, there's also, I think, a lot of stigma around being a smoker. So maybe they don't want to associate with the smoker label and have to deal with the maybe social consequences of being around that. I know that in certain communities particularly, I've had some conversations with a South Asian lady that was really conscious of the fact that her parents didn't know that she smoked, and she came through treatment with us and asked us to deliver her medication in plane right into a friend's house so that she could quit tobacco without her parents knowing that she ever smoked. There's sometimes a lot of misinformation out there about what a smoker is. Every health professional will ask the question of, do you smoke? If you've ever been for a GP appointment or practice nurse appointment ever, you will have that question asked of you. And if you're using something that's not producing smoke, or you're using something that produces smoke but isn't cigarettes or tobacco, for example, vaping, you might either associate or not associate yourself with the smoker label just because of misinformation that is out there.
So what would you say to anybody who's listening at the moment who uses some form of the smokeless forms of tobacco and maybe they may not think it's harmful to them? What would you say to them?
It is harmful. Not just the health implications, which are obviously incredibly severe for people, but also the financial implications, the social implications of being a tobacco user. The best time to quit is right now. You know, there's lots of different products. There's so much research now on how we can help, and we will try and help to be able to help people quit. But also, it's never too late to quit smoking. We understand that it's so easy to get addicted to tobacco. These things are designed to be as addictive as possible, to make sure as many people as possible use them. But there's no judgment at Be Smokefree, and I think that's something that's really important to stress. We're really aware of stigma in different communities and all across the country when people are using tobacco in whatever form it comes. But we're here to help. There will be something that will help you. We will find it.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks so much. I think that's a really good message to end on. It's never too late.
No.
The best time to stop is now. And you and your service are there to help. And you've described so many different ways in which you can help anyone who's using any form of tobacco to stop smoking. So thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Unfiltered Podcast. To listen to the whole series, visit manchestercitycouncil.podbean.com or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember, if you use tobacco in any form, the best step you can take for your health today is to quit. Free support is available through the Be Smokefree Manchester service run by Change, Grow, Live Manchester. And you can just search online to find their contact details. Or if you live outside Manchester, you can check the NHS website to find your local stop smoking service. Now is the time to get the support you need to quit for good.